Hello, my friends, and welcome to Focus on Faculty Research here at Longwood University. My name is Brent Roberts, and I am the Dean of Greenwood Library at Longwood. And today I'm speaking with Dr. Hannah Dudley-Shotwell, author of the amazing book, Revolutionizing Women's Healthcare, the Feminist Self-Help Movement in America. We're very excited to be talking with Hannah today. And we're always excited to shed light on the amazing research that faculty do here at Longwood University. So in terms of introducing our guest speaker today, Hannah is an award-winning scholar from Evington, Virginia. And you may have to tell us where Evington is. She earned her PhD in American history and a post-baccalaureate certificate in women's gender and sexuality studies from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. And currently she is an honors faculty scholar in the Cormier Honors College here at Longwood University in beautiful Farmville, Virginia. Whoop, whoop, whoop. So let's get into the book, Revolutionizing Women's Healthcare. Hannah, it's great to have you with us. Let's get started. Just tell us, this really seems like an important chapter in the history of feminism. Can you talk about the connection between feminism and the self-help movement?
Sure, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Let me answer your first question, which is where's Evington now? It's right south of Lynchburg, between Lynchburg and Alta Vista. So about an hour from here. So the connection between feminism and the self-help movement, they really kind of grew up together. The self-help movement kind of emerged when what we often think of as second wave feminism, so 60s, 70s, going into the 80s kinds of feminism was like really kind of getting into its stride. And I often think of self-help as a way that feminists put theory into action. So the self-help movement is a group of feminists who said, we don't like the way we're being treated in doctors' offices. We don't like not having autonomy over our bodies. And, you know, they would get together and talk about this kind of thing, but then they decided to put those ideas into action and do something about it. And they did many things about it, including starting their own feminist clinics. They wrote books, they published movies, they went on tours around the country to teach other people about these ideas. So many wonderful ways of putting this the kinds of things that people were rapping about and talking about into action.
Great, great. Well, so you mentioned the self-help clinics. Could you? So there's a lot of space in your book about, you know, it's tied in with Roe v. Wade and giving women the options, accessibility to abortion and other birth control methods. What other types of things could women find at these clinics?
So self-help clinics essentially arose around the same time as Roe v. Wade was. Roe v. Wade is 1973. And so around that time, you're getting a lot of feminist clinics that want to be able to provide abortions in a way that women can control a little more easily themselves. And alongside that, the feminist clinics would provide what we often call well woman care. So this is just general gynecological care, things like pap smears, breast exams, that kind of thing. But what they would do that was really unique at the time, and still even today you don't see much of this, they would have women come in groups and do those kinds of things together for themselves and for each other. So part of what women would do is they would come in and learn how to conduct a pap smear, for example, and they would do this in groups. They would learn how to do a cervical self-exam or a breast exam in groups. They would even learn, at the time you couldn't just get an over-the-counter pregnancy test at CVS. So they would learn how to do a blood test to test for pregnancy. And again, all this is mostly happening in groups in order to kind of give women autonomy over their own bodies and sort of situate them as the expert on their own health.
Interesting. Who were or what was what type of women were involved, you know, that attended these clinics or got involved with this whole movement?
That's a great question. So you see, at first, a lot of the clinics are founded by middle-class white women. They often have, more time to volunteer. Sometimes the women were putting their own money towards these kinds of ventures. So that's who you see, particularly at first, in the clinics that are really focused on gynecology. Now, that's also who you would see as clients at those clinics, pretty commonly for the well women kinds of things. For abortions, what clinics started noticing was that poor women and women of color tended to be their main clients because they provided really reasonably priced abortions, but they did not tend to get involved with the well woman clinics, learning to do your own kinds of healthcare. And, in trying to figure out what's going on with that, a lot of white women who were founders of the clinics were dialoguing with women of color who were starting other kinds of self-help efforts. So Black women, for example, founded something called the National Black Women's Health Project. And the mission there was to say, okay, yes, women's health, the gynecology part is really important, but there's a more holistic kind of health that we're not even thinking about here that's really important for women of color and Indigenous women. So thinking about how internalized and systemic racism affected their stress and therefore their health, and also thinking about what other kinds of ways can we improve women's health and take matters into our own hands beyond gynecology.
Okay. So was this like a new movement, or had it been kind of percolating over the years? And at a couple of points in your book, you use the word radical. How did it become radical?
I think it's been percolating for a long time, or it had been percolating for a long time. Women have always tried to find ways to control the timing of their reproduction. We know that from the fact that women got illegal underground abortions before Roe. We know that because women have found methods of birth control when birth control was illegal, which was, for a long time in American history prior to this. So it's kind of it owes a lot. The self-help movement owes a lot to those efforts that people have been engaging in for a long time to control their reproduction. But there's something in the air at this time, and I think that goes back to your first question about like kind of how self-help and feminism go together. The feminist movement is just absolutely taking off at this time, and women are trying to find ways to get involved, and this one really really appealed to a lot of people. What I think is radical about it is just the difference in what it was like to walk into a self-help clinic and get care amongst your peers versus a gynecological appointment in 1970 where you meet your doctor already under a drape and in stirrups, and he talks to you like you're a child. So I think that is much of what's radical about this, but also the ways that women said, we're going to take charge of this and take charge of helping to get the word out, because with the printing books, and feminists are starting their own bookstores and publishing companies. They're also starting their own credit unions, so like you can get funding for some of these ventures. Just all of that happening at the same time, I think, is what makes it a new and radical kind of venture.
Great. So I have to tell you, I learned a lot from your book. There were a lot of these things that, I only knew a little bit or nothing at all about. One of the things that kind of surprised me was that I've always thought about Planned Parenthood as being very supportive of women's access to birth control options. And it turns out, according to your research, there was quite a bit of friction between these clinics and Planned Parenthood as an organization. Could you talk about why that was?
Yeah, so Planned Parenthood, of course, starts as an advocate of birth control under Margaret Sanger back in the early 20th century. And according to self-help activists, it had become sort of a corporate kind of venture by the 70s. And in a Planned Parenthood clinic, you were usually going to be seen by a male doctor, and you weren't going to have these same self-help types of experiences where you learn about your own body in this really empowering way. I will say I do not think that is so much the case for Planned Parenthood of today. I think that Planned Parenthood of today is much more in line with kind of feminist values. But self-help experts of the 60s and 70s really had a lot of conflict with Planned Parenthood, also over kind of turf wars, who's going to set up a shop in this area, and you know, like if Planned Parenthood is going to be able to undercut prices because they're a bigger kind of institution. And of course, Planned Parenthood has is sort of known for having ties with the eugenics movement of the earlier 20th century. A lot of those ties had really been severed by the 60s and 70s, but it's one of those things that self-help activists kind of couldn't let go of, those earlier ties.
I see. Well, so that was one thing that kind of surprised me in that I learned in reading your book. Was there anything as you were doing the research for this book that surprised you that you weren't anticipating?
So much. I think the breadth of what I found is what was most surprising to me. I came to this research because I was interested in pre-Roe v. Wade types of underground abortion. And, you know, I start digging through archives about that kind of thing and come across feminist clinics. So I learned about, you know, kind of some of what self-help activists were doing right before Roe v. Wade legalized abortion. And then much of the story of self-help after that gets kind of lost in other literature about feminism and women's health and reproductive rights. But what I found was that it's still influencing healthcare today in all of these really interesting ways. And it continued through the 70s, 80s, 90s. It just shows up everywhere in all kinds of ways that I wasn't expecting when I first started thinking about abortion. The one example that comes to mind is that Native American women really got interested in how to use self-help to prevent fetal alcohol syndrome amongst women on the reservation. So like very far removed from what I originally thought, but that was what was great about it.
Great. Well, Hannah, this has been a wonderful conversation, and I appreciate you taking time to meet with us today.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely.
The book, Revolutionizing Women's Healthcare, the Feminist Self-Help Movement in America, the author, Hannah Dudley-Shotwell, right here from Longwood University. Check it out today at Greenwood Library. Thanks.